Once upon a time, there was fear. Old fear. Primal fear. A fear of blood and pounding feet. A fear of that sudden burst of pain, and then nothing. And that fear was nothing. Went nowhere. Knew not what it was. Then it became. Or perhaps it always was and simply entered. But fear was here, and true, and was itself, and it hungered. It wished to know more. It wished to feel more. It wished to be more. And to those things that hurried through the grass, that shivered through the night in their burrows and their caves because they knew the dark held flashing talons and shining eyes, they fed the fear. It was blunt and it was simple, but still it was solid enough to satisfy. And the thing that was fear was sated and content. Then came minds that knew it differently. They grew slowly, over the millennia. Inch by inch they found new things to dread. The fear of their own end, of the things that lived in the darkness, became a fear of the darkness itself. And as they grew to know what it is that they saw, to give it names and struggle at learning, so too did they learn to fear that their eyes might deceive them, or show them too much. And as they learned to know their friends and kin, so too did they learn to fear the unknown figure, the coming of the stranger, and the silence when they were alone. And when they found fire, that bright ignition of home and hope and progress, the thing that was fear gorged itself on a newfound terror once again. And as these tiny, strange minds grew and learned, they did something new. They began to take their thoughts, their instincts and their horrors, and they crystallized them. They gave them sound and form and shape to share them. And as they did, the thing that was fear felt itself begin to tear, to crack and fracture along 1,000 unseen fault lines. It bled and warped and multiplied and could no longer see itself as once it did. It could never be whole again. But within these forms were freedoms, new and wonderful dreads to push and explore, new muscles to flex. The joy of oozing, crawling pestilence as minds distrusted their own corrupted bodies. The satisfaction of surrounding them, suffocating them, reaching down into them and drinking in their panic as breath failed them. And as they grew to learn their place within the world, the pathetic meagerness of their own existence, they could not spin a story rich or grand enough to fully hide their own awful insignificance, lost and alone in the terrible greatness of the universe. And by the time these minds had reached a point of intricacy to lie and scheme and puppet one another, they had also learned to conceive of war. And as the things that were fear hovered at the edge of the world, the flowing horror of these minds nourished them, swelling some and withering others, pushing and pulling the shattered, swirling mass of terror into ever newer and undiscovered forms. And something else began to happen. Some minds did not simply recoil from them and feed them. Some seemed almost to call them, to court them, to hunger for them in return. Minds that saw the faces of the things that were fear and were compelled, as much as they were repulsed. Whether or not they knew what it was they did, they called out, and they were answered. Time is different for fear, and it cannot be said exactly who was the first to open themselves and be filled with the power of terror. A hermit, huddled in a pitch-black cave through winter, who emerged and brought the depth of night with him. wherever he trod. A pestilent chieftain who found her breath sloughed from her body and rotted whatever it touched. A warrior driven from their village who found their face as smooth and shifting as the sands of their home. Which came first does not matter. The unseen gap was bridged, and the thin veil between the world that was and the things that were fear had been torn ever so slightly. And with this tear they grew stronger, bolder, pouring themselves into the world and creating monsters. Long things that wore you like a suit, smiling things that stripped you from your bones, unseen things that watched and watched and watched and never left you. And with each new creation, each new servant, the fears reached further and fed the things that made them. And with this newfound power came greed, the hunger for more, the unformed, unfocused, but impossibly huge desire to exist, to join the minds that gave them shape and purpose and finally drink their fill till they were one and the same. They had no concept of how, or when, or even why, but they needed it. They needed it. And so the things that were fear began to sing, to draw ever more multitudes to them, to shape them and push them and beg them for freedom, for existence. But though they jostled and pushed and fought to emerge, they could not. They could not conceive of what or where they were beyond the words and images the minds below could give them. But there was one, the part that some would call the spider, that had been given a gift beyond all its brethren. The minds that feared grew suspicious of their own schemes, of connections and consequences, and over time these suspicions became threads, then webs, then nerves that granted the spider, the mother of puppets, the hidden machination, a mind of its own, to plot and plan and draw its own connections, its own conclusions. Wheels within wheels within wheels. It would not, could not tell its other parts, for were they even able to understand such things which they could not? To trust, to share in such a way ran counter to its very essence. And so it drew its plan to escape not only this ephemeral cage of non-existence, but even the very reality into which they might break. And it chose its fool, the great I, the most unwise of all the fragments, forever seeking and consuming knowledge that it could not comprehend. It played and twisted, and through the I brought about a new world, a wide and unending vista of terror and agony, and the place from which it might spread, and spin another web far grander than anything conceived of in the minds that birthed it. Finally, it would find its escape, and with it, apotheosis. No, it won't. It has only found its end.